I can tell you what goes in my head when I think about my childhood is it's not fair. That's not fair. Like, just hear me. I just remember so frustrating. And I think like I would go to them to tell them and they didn't want to hear it. And it's like, who do I go to? So I would have to take care of myself. And so how that looked over the years though is I did act out. I had a voice, but not a positive voice, right? It wasn't a healthy positive voice. So if I'm not going to be heard, you're going to hear me and I'm going to be loud about it. And so that's what I did for a lot of years.
Welcome back to the Truth That Heals podcast. I am your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez. And for today's episode, we have special guest Lisa Tickel, who will be sharing with us her journey of growing up in sadly a toxic environment and the trauma that she experienced from childhood. And she also shares with us her journey of recovery, of finding healing, finding her ability to process things, finding her power to get her voice back. And she also shares with us how she has been on the road going towards resilience. So just a heads up, yes, we do speak a bit about childhood trauma. So if that is something which may be a sensitive topic, just giving a heads up to the audience. And before we begin, if you have not yet subscribed, go ahead and hit that like button, that subscribe button, and feel free to comment and share, whether it's on YouTube or on other podcast platforms, wherever. Please help get the word out about this podcast existing. Let's get the word across and let's have more people engage in it so we can share and so that the word can come out that this podcast exists. So without your help, I can't do that much. But when people are helping and sharing, it really helps to grow this podcast. And I appreciate all the people who have watched and subscribed, all of you who have commented previously. I love you all, and I hope you enjoy this episode with the amazing Lisa Tickel. Thank you. I'm here with Lisa Tickel, who has her own podcast, and that is Healing and Growing Hand in Hand. Welcome to the show, Lisa. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And well, it's great to have you on the show. You have a very important topic to speak with the podcast about, and that is childhood abuse and healing. Um, Before we really dive into that, can you tell us a little bit about your story, how this all got started? Of you having this mission. I mean, that's a big mission.
Yeah, it's actually it's a passion. It's really a passion of mine. So my abuse started as far back as I can remember. Excuse me. That picture back there of me is as far back as I can remember having abuse. And it was my father, my mother, and my brother. And so with my brother, it was all types of abuse except for sexual abuse. My father, he didn't protect me. He basically abandoned the family. And with my mother, it was definitely verbal and physical abuse. And so, the thing that really pushed me to do this podcast is I started my healing journey when I was 19. So I did have childhood abuse throughout those years. It was really rough in my teenage years. And there wasn't anything out there. I was 19 years old when I decided to start the healing journey. I'm now 60. So I've been on the journey for a while, but the majority of my healing has really happened over the last probably 13 years because there's so much more information out there. But I lost my mom when I was 16. So of the two parents, she was the one that would probably, believe it or not, protect me the most. And so I lost her. And my dad was completely lost at that point after she died. And so I was pretty much on my own to not only manage the abuse that I was dealing with, but also the loss of my mother, the grief there. And that was really traumatic because I wasn't warned that she was dying.
Mhm.
And so I found out in a very traumatic way. So there was a lot going on there. And I just remember, well, the last time my brother actually hit me, I was 17. And my dad didn't stop him. As a matter of fact, my father got mad at me for getting my brother upset. And it was at that point that I looked at my dad and I said, "You're not protecting me. And I tell you what, when I turn 18 years old, if this man touches me again, I will call the police." And so he never touched me again. But then I started, I knew something didn't feel right inside of me. I never called myself broken, but I could feel that something wasn't right. What I didn't realize is I was feeling a lot of pain, but I just didn't realize what it was. So I went on a mission and I did some healing over the years. Not a lot of healing because again, there wasn't a lot of information out there and I couldn't afford to go to therapy. I mean, that's another problem today is a lot of people can't afford the therapy. And so then about 2008 or so, I was involved at church and I got involved in a childhood abuse healing workshop for women. I went through it myself, actually in the early 2000s, and was offered the position to help co-facilitate the workshop. And so I did that for 8 years and it was an amazing journey watching so many women begin their healing journey because so many of them hadn't even shared their story ever. So, of course, when you're doing these workshops and doing this kind of stuff, you go into deeper healing yourself. And so, anyway, fast forward to today. Like I said, I've been on a pretty big healing journey over the last 13 years. I've done a tremendous amount of growing, tremendous amount of healing. And my goal in life, especially with my podcast, is to help shorten people's pain.
So going back to a few years ago when you were asked by the church to help facilitate, uh, was that the moment where you saw that you had a passion for this?
Most valuable thing to me was watching women heal, watching women have that ability to start healing. These women had suffered for years. There's statistics out there that, on average, women who are sexually abused as a child are abused between the ages of 13 and 17. They don't have a voice for 4 decades. So these women, and this is true with men as well, but I'm talking about the workshop. So these women have suffered for 4 decades, 40 years before they open their mouth. And to watch these women begin healing and get rid of some of that pain, no amount of money you could not pay me enough money to do that. I mean, I would do it for free forever.
So I wanted to go back a little bit to your earlier story about you growing up in that environment, not having a father protecting his daughter. When you made that boundary that if he touches me again, if he hits me again, I'm gonna call the police. How were you received in that house? Did you?
Dad didn't want to have any conflict. My dad could not handle conflict. He literally, when my brother would act up, so my brother also, he had an alcohol and drug problem as well as probably some mental illness. Um, and when he would act up, my dad would literally go and hide. And so when I was telling my dad that, he didn't say anything. He just looked at me. I don't know I mean, I don't know what he was thinking. There was a time later in the years that I actually confronted him about the abuse and asked him why he didn't protect me, and he would not even look at me. He was in such shame, and so I was kind of the bad guy. I was because I'm the one that would, apparently get my brother upset.
But even when you made that boundary, they still, do you feel that there was more respect or
No,
no?
there was no respect. There was absolutely none. And again, it was very clear when I finally actually confronted my dad about it, and when he wouldn't even acknowledge it. He literally wouldn't look at me. His bottom lip was quivering, and he wouldn't acknowledge it. So that told me right there, that I wasn't going to get anywhere. And
And
what
then,
I found out later in life too is they both were abused in their lives, which there is generational trauma. And but that doesn't excuse his behavior for not protecting me.
so at 19, you started your own healing journey. Can you walk us through that chapter in your life?
Yeah. I was going to church at the time, and again, I knew I didn't feel right inside, and I was really searching. So I literally started with my Bible. I literally went in my bedroom, pulled my Bible out, and started looking through it to look for answers. And I wasn't getting any answers that I was looking for. And so I did start with church, and I did start with counseling at church. And that definitely, some of the counselors I had were really good and helped me go a little deep. But the thing that we didn't know then that we know now, and it explains why I struggled for so many years, is trauma literally gets stored in our bodies. We have to literally get it out of our bodies. And I call them the side effects of trauma, which is how we act out because we're in trauma. That has to be dealt with a different way too. It's not just always therapy, talk therapy. And so I struggled for a long time. I guess the thing that helped me the most was having some self-awareness, because I was aware of I didn't like the way I felt. I was aware of I need to get help. It just wasn't out there like it is now. So I did that in church for a long time. I did counseling because that's what I could afford. I couldn't afford to go outside of that. And again, it helped for a while. I did the workshop. Going through the workshop for 8 years, I did a lot of healing in that, because you can't help it when you're in there doing that stuff. Stuff gets stirred up in you, and you have to address it. You can't just ignore it. So that was really big. But the biggest turn for me, and why I believe my healing it exacerbated, I guess, is that at about 2011, I divorced my husband, my first husband, and we were married for a long time. We were married for 25 years, together for 30. And it was two unhealthy people coming together. But in all that, it stirred up a lot of stuff in me, a lot of abandonment issues. It triggered a lot of stuff. So I was at that point able to really get into some counseling. And so that's what really, and I went in and I did EMDR. It's an acronym. I don't remember what the full name is, but
Yes.
that has definitely helped me. And then I'm hungry for help. So I'm out searching for help myself, reading books and listening to podcasts, and just opening up my self-awareness more and more.
So it sounds like you were really immersed in this abusive environment, one from your brother, the physical side, then you have the verbal abuse, then you have that abandonment where your father would just go
Yeah.
and hide. If trauma, in your perspective, if trauma is left unhealed, does that influence future relationships? And if so,
Such
how?
a great question. Yes, it does. It does. And I didn't see it at the time. I've been married. I'm married 3 times now. I'm with my husband now. That's amazing. um, but yeah, you do, and it's not uncommon, especially for women who've been abused, to end up in domestic violence relationships. A lot of times it ends up being like a narcissistic relationship, which my first marriage, we were both really unhealthy. We really should not have been together. And we fed off each other. And so there's probably narcissistic behavior on both our parts. I know on my part, it was an unhealthy environment for my son as well. I'm not proud of that. Um, and I got right out of that relationship. And because of my abandonment issues, I ended up right into another relationship. And it was a full on narcissist, full on narcissist. And I didn't know what that word was. I didn't know that that was what
Yeah.
he was. But I had done enough healing at that point that I knew that his behavior was really weird. Like, it was crazy. And I used to say to him a lot, like, what is wrong with you? It's so bizarre. He would accuse me of the most bizarre things. And I'm like, I don't understand this, because I know I didn't do that.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, he got sick with cancer. We were married just a year and a half before he passed from cancer. So I stayed with him. I was actually planning on leaving. He didn't know it, when we got the cancer diagnosis. And so I put the brakes on that and helped him. Um, and then I really had to do some deep healing, because if I ever wanted to be in a relationship again, I wasn't going to do it like I did before. And I knew I was the common denominator. I needed to fix this. I needed to work on me. And so I did. And so now I'm in a very, very different relationship than I've ever been in. It's a healthy one. We joke, but it's like iron sharpens iron. We support each other. We help each other, and so it's great. But yeah, if you do not have your trauma healed, you're going to end up not just even in a husband or a wife, or it's friendships. It affects all your relationships, because I even got abused at work.
Hmm.
My work relationships, it's just it will it will affect every part of your life.
And seeing that you've experienced that trauma at home, in relationships, at work, would you say that you have experienced forms of gaslighting?
Yeah.
How does that look?
So gaslighting is when they flat out blame you for everything, right? He did that all the time. My second husband did that. He did that all the time. And that's why I looked at him. I'm like, an example was he accused me one time of that I asked to borrow when we were dating, that I asked to borrow $20,000. I've never asked him for money, right? And $20,000, that's a pretty big number.
Yes.
And it took me a while to figure out where he got that number from. Like, because I looked at him and said, I never asked. And no, you did, you did. And it took me a while. And then I realized what happened is I was going to be getting a settlement, and we were moving into his house when we got married, and I wanted to put some money into the house to help. So I said, when I get my settlement, I'll give you $20,000. We can put new windows in. That's where he got that number from. But it took me literally weeks to figure that out, because I'm like, there's something about that $20,000. Where did that number come from? And I figured it out. So yeah, he did that a lot. But again, I was healed enough to realize that's bizarre. I know I didn't say that, but I know in the narcissistic relationships, gaslighting done enough times, you're going to start believing them.
Yeah,
There
the
is no other
lies.
relationship like a narcissistic relationship, and until you've been in one, you have no idea what they're like.
No, you start questioning your own reality and you start thinking, well,
Totally.
shoot, did I ask for the $20,000 loan? Maybe I did. I don't remember.
He did this early enough in the relationship that I knew something was up. That's why I planned on leaving. I was literally going to give up everything. I was going to go rent a room, a furnished bedroom from somebody, and completely start over. That's how bad I wanted to get away from it.
Okay. And then now this relationship that you're in, you would describe it as healthy. And I love how you said sharpens iron. What can you tell us about how life is like now being in a healthy relationship in comparison to previous relationships?
So, the one thing I did a lot, especially in my first marriage, was I yelled a lot, and it was pure frustration. It's not okay. And I actually apologized to my son when I realized the environment that he grew up in. It was my ex-husband and I yelling at each other. And there was a lot of lies. So there was, I didn't even trust myself. So I go into these relationships and I can't trust them. So there wasn't trust. It was I was in absolute survival mode. Absolute survival mode. So I was constantly trying to fix everything. And so I was never at peace. I was never calm. So if I'm in survival mode and I get angry, I'm going to hit the ceiling because I'm already walking around upset, right? So there was a lot of, I just wasn't at peace at all. I wasn't calm. I tried to create it, but I just wasn't there. And it was a lot of that's because the trauma was still in me. And I was in a relationship where I was constantly being triggered. And so how it is now is we don't scream, we don't yell, we don't even fight. We have discussions. If I feel myself getting upset, I say, I need a minute. I need to go process. And he's very respectful of giving me that space. We consider our home our sanctuary. And so we make sure we protect that. We protect what we watch, what we hear, what we say, who we allow in our home. Um, we're best friends. We laugh. I mean, there's just, it's completely different than what I had before. And I don't want to take away, especially from my first husband, because there's a lot of pain there for him that he needs to heal. And it's not like he's a bad guy. We weren't good together.
Yeah. And you admit that, you acknowledge that.
And I apologize to him for my parts. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you gave some very good advice just a few seconds ago, saying that you tell your spouse, I need a minute, I need to process. What does processing look like, and how can someone in the audience who wants to do that, how can they figure out the steps to to doing that?
That's a great question and very important. So when I say that, I'm trying to figure out, am I being triggered? Am I really upset? What am I upset about? So I don't want to say anything because the old Lisa, when she would get triggered, would just, right? I would just
Mhm.
say stuff and it was not pretty. And so now what I do is I literally do go away, step away, and I do think about it. And processing means I want to go through the whole thing and make sure, again, like I'm not just being triggered. Okay, I'm upset. Is it legit? Okay, it's legit. Is how upset I am line up with what happened? Because I have to watch my emotions. I have to manage them because they can go off the radar like real quick. And so once I figure it out, then I'm able to go back to. And I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, we were having a discussion, and I felt myself getting upset. And I told him, I said, I need a minute. I need a minute. And so I went into the bathroom and I was brushing my teeth and washing my face or something. And all of a sudden, my entire throat started to hurt so bad, ache really, really, really bad. And what I realized is I had figured out in my head what had happened and what I needed to say. And I had for 50 years didn't have a voice, right? So I wouldn't say. I needed to go and say it. I knew I needed to say. I knew I had it figured out in my head. I needed to go say it now. And so as I was walking out from the bathroom to the kitchen to where he was at, I could feel my throat loosening up. It was the craziest thing. And I said to him, I said, I'm ready to talk. Are you? And he said, yeah. And so I said it and it was fine. If I would have reacted without doing that, it would have been ugly.
Now, you said something that I really liked about, well, I like, and it's unfortunate at the same time, but at this point of your story, you have a voice. You're
Yeah.
able to process. The sad part is before you didn't have a voice. How was it like as a child always being neglected? And what were the steps you took throughout the years to find that voice?
So I can tell you what goes in my head when I think about my childhood is it's not fair. That's not fair. Like, just hear me. I just remember so frustrating. And I think like I would go to them to tell them and they didn't want to hear it. And it's like, who do I go to? So I would have to take care of myself. And so how that looked over the years though is I did act out. I had a voice, but not a positive voice, right? It wasn't a healthy positive voice. So if I'm not going to be heard, you're going to hear me and I'm going to be loud about it. And so that's what I did for a lot of years. And then it was interesting. It was probably, and it was with my current husband. He's really the first person outside of therapy that is my safe space. Honestly, I've never had a person in my life outside of therapy that was my safe space, and he definitely is. And we were talking one day, we were in the car, we were just talking about something very basic, nothing big. And all of a sudden I went to say something to him and it wouldn't come out. And he looked at me, he said, are you going to say something? And I said, well, I was, but it won't come out. And he's like, well, just say it. And I'm like, it won't come out. It literally won't come out. It felt stuck. And he's like, okay, well, when you're ready, say it. And so that right there, him giving me that, like, not trying to make me say it and just like, okay, well, when you're ready, well, then say it. And I'm here. He always created this safe space. And so I think part of it, I know for me, part of it is I felt like if I said that, he's going to think I'm crazy and he's going to leave me. And so I started testing him. And so I started saying, and he's still here. He hasn't left me. And my very good friend Liz, it was the same thing. And when I realized what I was doing, and I went back to her and I said, do you know, I couldn't say things to you. She goes, I knew there was something going on. You'd look at me and I knew you wanted to say something, but it wouldn't come out. And I didn't understand what was going on. I said, I didn't have a voice. Now I do. Look out.
So I love hearing this journey, this processes, these steps that you've taken. Now I would like to kind of dive into another topic, and that is forgiveness.
Mm.
What does that look like? How does that feel? Did you have to forgive? Did you not forgive? Walk us through that if you can.
So, yes, I did forgive. I definitely forgave my brother. I'm still in the process with my dad and my mom. I'm pretty far into it because forgiveness is a process. Forgiveness is such it's a touchy word because some people um say, oh well, you should never forgive them for what they did, they're terrible. But really, and this is my belief,
Mhm.
and it has worked for me, is that forgiveness is more for me than anything else. It never makes it okay what they did. It's forgiveness so that I don't carry the anger, the hurt, and the pain, which then can turn into bitterness and resentment. I don't want to go there. I lived there for a long time. And so for my brother, it's interesting. When I took the workshop back in the early 2000s, I only saw my brother as my abuser. I didn't see my parents, which is interesting.
Mm.
And so going through the workshop, I was more focused on my brother. And so in the workshop, the one thing that really helped me forgive him is I had cut ties with him because he had gone after my son. And the first time he did that, that was it. I said, he's not welcome. And there was a lot of guilt for that. And they said in the workshop that if the person is still abusing you, you're not called to reconcile with them. You shouldn't reconcile with them, but you should forgive them for you. And that was really freeing for me. And so I did forgive my brother. I can tell those stories, and they don't have the effect on me. My mom and my dad is another process because it's only been over the last 10 years that I can see the depth of I knew my mom was abusive with me, but then I really didn't see the depth of my dad. And so as I'm realizing this stuff, of course, it's stirring up the pain and the anger. And so I'm in the process of forgiving them. I'm pretty close to being done. I'm almost there. Um, but some of that is still a little fresh, so I'm still working on it.
No, and that's I think that's something that the audience and for me myself, it's very valuable to hear because I come from a place where I've heard people telling survivors of different, abuse stories,
Yeah.
saying things like, and this is more like church related,
Right,
just
right, right.
just forgive and forget, go and talk to them, pretend like nothing ever happened. But I didn't see that as fruitful. I thought it was fake, and but I like how you distinguished forgiveness and to reconcile. It's like,
Mhm.
it's a totally different thing, and I like how you worded that. So thank you.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people that, especially if it's a family member,
Mm.
especially if it's like a parent. Well, they're my dad, they're my mom. I have to take care of them. If they're still abusing you, no, 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 you don't. If they have reconciled with you, if they have, worked through it with you, that's different. But you don't have to be around them if they're still abusing you. And like I said, the minute he went after my son, the first time he went after my son, that was it. Because there wasn't anybody else that was going to protect my son.
Again, I really like how you word that because people have the idea that if you're going to forgive, you have to embrace these abusive people back into your life. And of course, not all the listeners are like that,
Right.
but in and like I mentioned before, in a lot of church circles, that is the idea that sometimes they have. And it's even as we've seen, unfortunately, there have been abusive relationships from pastors or
Oh,
counselors,
yeah.
teachers, and with that mentality of, oh, just forgive and forget, you have to because that's what God wants. It puts the guilt, it puts the burden on the victim, which for
Yeah.
me, it's
It just compounds it, and it's more traumatizing because the other thing that we're learning about trauma, like I said, it's stored in your body. So regular therapy isn't going to work. Going to a coach and having someone coach you who has no experience in childhood abuse or childhood trauma, they're only going to traumatize it more. And so this thing of just you got to forgive and forget. Forgiveness, again, in my opinion, is for me. It is for me. And it's up to me. And I know that forgiving my brother has set me free. He has no power over me anymore. I don't give him my power anymore. I wish him, I haven't seen my brother in 21 years, 22 years. I love him. I care about him. I absolutely wish him the best, but he's dangerous.
Does it feel empowering knowing that you have the choice to forgive or not to forgive?
Just what you were saying earlier, if someone's pushing that on you, they're pushing their agenda, and it's going to traumatize you more, because healing from trauma is a process, and forgiveness is really kind of at the end of it.
Mhm.
So if you've got someone at the very beginning of their healing journey, and you're pressing on them that they need to forgive, you are going to re-traumatize them, and what do trauma people do? They shut down. A lot of them shut down, and you can't get in there. And so when we did the workshop, we did do a night of forgiveness, but we did it at the very last night. And it was 100% voluntary on the women's part. And every one of them always ended up participating. But if we would have caught them in the first night when they're vulnerable and scared and said, okay, you need to forgive now, they're going to run for the door. So forgiveness, there's stuff you got to work through before you can get to the point that you can probably really forgive them.
So now, I kind of want to start talking about another topic, and that is your podcast. Walk us
Yes.
through what the episodes are like and how it feels for you to be a podcaster.
It is so exciting. It is absolutely my passion. I love it. I am meeting the most amazing people. I'm learning a ton. And so the purpose of my podcast really is to shorten people's pain, is to get information out there to help people. I didn't have that, and so I want to be able to give that to others. So it's a platform where it gives people a voice to tell their story of abuse and healing, and sharing how they did their healing journey, because everybody's healing journey is kind of custom. There wasn't one thing that really got me through this all. It's been layers of stuff. The second reason I do the podcast is to bring on experts who can share in the different areas. And it's not just a healing, it's also in growing. So something like, for instance, limited beliefs, people who are abused or not abused are going to deal with that. And so I bring on experts that'll talk about those topics and help people through. And then the third thing is, this is kind of new, it's kind of interesting, is making awareness in areas where you wouldn't think there's abuse, or you may not realize the depth of the abuse. And I'll give you an example. I have a guest, he'll be on here in the next few weeks, and he's an attorney who specializes in the children in sports, the abuse that happens with children in sports. And it is, it's unbelievable how bad it is. So he gives the statistics, but just in the United States, there's 20 million children a year that play sports, right? Over 30% are abused. And just in this subject alone, if we were to get awareness out there and education out there, because that's what he does. He does awareness, education. He also does investigations. But he says when he speaks in front of crowds, he'll ask the question, how many of you have children in sports? And hands go up. And then how many of you know someone? By the time he gets done asking those questions, just about everybody's hand is up. Could you imagine if you just trained those people alone, how effective that would be in the world? So it's to bring a lot of awareness in areas. And I'm so passionate about that one. I told him I'm willing to help you, and whatever you need done. I mean, I'll bring awareness or whatever. It's amazing. So that's what my podcast is about.
So you have your two passions. You have on one side your passion to help people shorten the pain and to heal. On the other side, you have your passion for now it's for podcasting. What doors do you see that opening for the future?
Well, let's see. I am going to be putting together my workshop again. So the childhood abuse healing workshop, that's in the future. I am working on a course. I won't talk about that yet because we're still in the middle of that. I have a lot of people asking me if I'll write a book. That's probably in the works down the road. I just literally pray that the podcast will really explode, and not for me,
Yeah.
not for me, but to help those people out there that, there's still a lot of people out there that haven't even begun their healing journey, and they can't afford therapy, which that's another subject we could probably get on in this country, right? About mental health and the lack of help for people. So if this is the one thing I can do, if I can even help just one person,
Mhm.
you know,
And it does make a difference. You help one person, and then later down that line, that person could help two people, and
right.
then those two people, and well,
The
that's
ripple
my
effect.
that's my hope. That's my hope in doing my own podcast, that
Yeah.
it can help bring awareness to things like this. And so, again, thank you so much, Lisa Tickel. And can you just, if you have any words of advice that you would like to give to an audience member who might be suffering at this moment, or who might not know where to go, what words of wisdom or advice can you give to them?
Hang on. It does get better, and keep searching for help, but it does get better. I never in my life imagined my life would be where it is today. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of pain. It's been worth every bit of it. And so hang in there, you know, seek help. There is a lot of stuff out there now. There's podcasts, there's my podcast, there's books. So there is hope. You can have a healing from childhood abuse. I believe we're on our healing journey until we take our last breath, but it does get better. It definitely gets better and easier.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And to the audience, make sure you go check out Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcasts by Lisa Tickel. And Lisa, thank you so much for joining us here on the Truth That Heals podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.